start building custody for institutions like the panelists or the companies represented here in the panel. And we have seen how the traditional institutions have been catching up in crypto. And we have seen how the traditional institutions have been catching up in crypto and learning how to operate and what can be the potential or the importance of this technology. And answering to your question,
if you're coming to this space with a blank slate and you ignore all of the bias and the things you've heard in the headlines and the froth, and you just start with where we are from that lens, it's almost impossible as a thoughtful investor to say I shouldn't be involved. There's something you're actually not being honest with yourself. It's almost impossible as a thoughtful investor to say I shouldn't be involved.
In your letter to partners, you said 2024 has the potential to be what you called a pivotal moment for inclusive growth. So can you expand on that for us and ultimately what it means for the UAE?
24 is a very, very important year, in my opinion, when you look at the next 5, 10 years, 15-year trajectory going forward, particularly when you look at the sectors that the UAE is focusing on and de facto the sectors that we as an investment institution, Mubadala, are focusing on. So when you look at key themes, energy transition, technology, artificial intelligence, within that, digital infrastructure. These are all spaces that are undergoing a massive transformation, I would say a profound transformation, that today, when we look back in 10 years, we will look at 2024 and probably 2023 as really critical foundation years for a massive investment journey in these spaces that investment institutions and countries, in this case, that took the right decisions in these two, in my opinion, critical years, 23, 24. 10 years from now, we'll look back I think, and we'll be very satisfied if they took the right decisions.
With all that in mind, how do we deal with this issue of exchange rates and interoperability? How do we get these digital currencies to really just talk to each other?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think when we talk about interoperability, we can see it at least in 3 different levels. So the first level is how we manage domestic interoperability. So how we generate this digital currency solution and make this speak with the other things that are out there in a little bit in the idea of generating a platform so that everyone can connect to that platform and take advantage of the huge network externalities that we can get out of there. The second level is how do we manage cross-border transactions, even within the same currency, and that presents a certain level of challenges there. But when we talk about cross-currency and cross-border, then we face a completely difficult and different environment, and we can see 3 dimensions here. One is the technical dimension, so how we manage to get a system that speaks in a certain cryptographic language to speak with another that speaks another slightly different language. So that is one level of complexity. We need to get the technologies to speak to each other. The messaging element is fundamental. The second dimension, which is much more complicated to solve, so that one, the first one was the easy one, okay? And there is a lot of money that is being put in terms of trying to solve these technical issues of interoperability. Now, the second one is more complicated. It has to do with liquidity. So imagine that you have a pair of currencies for which there is not a complementary demand. You need to go and search for a third-party currency in order to make this settlement actually happen. And this really complicates things. So we need to put pieces of technology that can make more efficiency this use of liquidity so that more transactions can be settled. The third dimension, which is even more difficult than the previous one, is how do we manage to get homogeneity in terms of the policy requirements on different countries. And this becomes even more complicated when we think about, for example, AML-CFT and principles-based policies, and when we think about risk-based policies. We can code things that are very clearly stated, but when we're talking about principles-based regulation, this thing becomes really complicated, especially in an environment, as Tom said, in which 110 nations might have 110 different ways of looking at this. So we need work in these 3 dimensions: technology, liquidity, and also, and more importantly, probably in the policy side of things. Think about AML-CFT, but also think about privacy. Different countries have very different views on this, no?
Now, and we believe it's so important to be anticipating the next move. I would also say on the beginnings of a ETF Bitcoin, we believe ETFs are a technology no different than Bitcoin was a technology for asset storage. We believe the next step going forward will be the tokenization of financial assets. And that means every stock, every bond will have its own, basically, CUSIP. It'll be on one general ledger. Every investor, you and I, will have our own number, our own identification. We could rid ourselves of all issues around illicit activities about bonds and stocks and digital by having a a tokenization. But the most importantly thing, we can customize strategies through tokenization that fits every individual. We would have instantaneous settlement. Think about all the costs of settling bonds and stocks. But if you had a tokenization, everything would be immediate because it's just a line item. And so we believe this is a technological transformation for financial assets. I believe if you want to talk about voting and voting choice and all the things, if we know every moment who is the owner of that stock and it's now time to vote, every individual who has ownership is identified and they can vote their own shares.
Is this the end of mutual funds?
I think, well, a lot of people, it's a wrapper. It's not the end of it, but I would say the dominant form of bringing products going forward will be in the form of ETFs.
I like the idea of a gold standard. I mean, it could be used in a very cryptocurrency way. The point is, do you have a unified money system so that when you talk about the international marketplace, everyone is playing on a level monetary playing field? And it's very important to have a rules-based approach, and that's why I'm advocating.
Comment on this as well. But Ryan, go ahead.
Proof of work doesn't work. Proof of work doesn't work. It's been widely...
Ryan, proof of work's been working.
Let me finish.
Let him
Proof
finish.
of work doesn't
Let
work.
him finish, please.
And in the early days of Bitcoin, there was a whole group of developers that broke off to create other assets, XRP being one of them, that doesn't use mining, that's cheaper from an energy perspective than Visa, and already scales to 1,500 transactions a second. A lot of these problems have already been solved. The challenge for adoption comes back to policy. The policy uncertainty around some of the assets has limited adoption, particularly here in the U.S. And I'm speaking from Ripple and XRP because we use that asset because it's a half a cent per payment. It's basically free. It scales, and it's efficient. It's 1,500 transactions a second at nearly no energy burn. So we're at a point today where there are real solutions to all of these challenges that already exist. Policy has become the challenge. And we heard on the first panel that around centralization on China. And this is going to be a hard pill for Peter to swallow. But 80% of the mining power for Bitcoin is controlled by 6 mining pools, 5 of which are in China. Today, the policy certainty in the U.S. exists for Bitcoin and Ethereum, despite the fact those are China-controlled platforms. So activity goes to those platforms. What we need to do from a policy perspective in the U.S. is look at the places where there are uncertainty. And one place, I'm speaking directly for me here, is XRP, where it looks like Bitcoin. It's decentralized. It's open source. We have 7% of the validation power on that, rather small in there. Grouping or giving clarity to those ones that are very similar to Bitcoin and Ethereum, that have the same characteristics and should be classified the same way. And then we're creating a level playing field across all the cryptos. I'm not anti-Bitcoin or anti-Ethereum by any means. I think there's a lot of great potential and breakthrough there. But we need to have a level playing field so the market can pick which ones they want to use and not be, as today they are, hindered by regulatory uncertainty.
And